Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Jeff Cross, the co-founder and CEO of NX. NX is a tool that helps thousands of developers worldwide daily optimize their productivity. It does this by making it seamless and efficient to work with monorepos, that's repositories that contain multiple projects. We actually dive into the details and formally define the term in the episode. But it also works well with CI pipelines, code mods, and more. Indeed, NX can help your code base with very large migrations, run tests, and also deflake tests. If you have flaky tests, NX can literally help remove the flakiness of your tests. We talk about the details of how this is built and the fact that it's available to you in this episode. This episode is no doubt a deep dive on NX, what it is, how it works, and how it benefits developers, including its internal mechanisms under the hood. We also talk about NX as a company, NX Cloud, and some of its features that help teams daily. Also, how it's built. If you're not picking up on it so far, it's really great because we talk to a technical founder about his product and how it works internally, as well as the business side. We asked Jeff, what's the hardest part about running a business? And his answer is very interesting. Now, I'd like to offer this to all of you at zero cost because this is separate to my day job. And the way we can do that is through sponsors and partners. Let's take a moment to thank them. The Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters is a great way to level up your coding because it teaches you how to do really great things with code in a language that you know and are familiar with. For example, we use tools every day like Git and Docker and Redis. With Code Crafters, they teach you how to build your own Git, Docker, and Redis in a language that you choose, JavaScript or Python. By doing this, you get better at the language you choose, but also the tool because you understand it deeper how it's built. It's a great double whammy of education. They have a generous free tier, but when you start paying, you can get up to 40% off using the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code Podcast is also partnered with Stately. Stately is a great way to visualize the flow of logic and state across your application using state machines and state charts. They do this with their great visualizer, and then you can even export this state machine, which is a diagram, to code and fill in the transition logic to go from state A to state B with your business code. In the end, you have fully working state managed application that is custom to your business. Stately also has a framework for working with AI agents and creating determinism and guardrails around their workflows. That's called Stately Agent. If you'd like to give any of this a try, go to stately.ai. The Contagious Code Podcast is also partnered with That Conference. That Conference is a multidisciplinary, family-first conference that happens twice a year, once in Wisconsin and once in Texas. The next That Conference is happening January 29th in Austin, Texas, and we often give tickets for free to people through a raffle system. So if you want to attend that conference, share this episode on social media, say you'd like to go to Texas, and you'll enter a raffle to win that. Hey, thanks for sticking around, and now for my discussion with Jeff Cross. Jeff B. Cross, thank you so much for coming on the Contagious Code Podcast today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you about NX and monorepos and tooling and code mods, and also the precursor to NX. I believe it was called Narwhal. I remember sitting in an office many, many years ago, and I think I saw a new project from, I think it was Microsoft called Sonarwhal. And then Narwhal, NRWL, came out. And then
it was like a wave of projects and companies named Narwhal. I think we were the first, though.
Everybody, do we know why everybody was so fascinated by narwhals?
I had a dream about narwhals. That's why that's why we ended up naming the company Narwhal. It was like this whole thing where I woke up and was kind of sleepwalking. Anyway, I won't get into the whole story. I mean, we can later, but but that's how we came up with it. So mine was like divine inspiration. All these other people are just, following the fad.
Yeah, I do want to hear that story. I was sleepwalking and there was a whale. For those who maybe English isn't the first language, by the way, a narwhal is a type of whale. It's a very big fish. Anyway, what an introduction!
Tusk, a big tooth.
Yeah, like the unicorn of fish. I was not expecting to start there, but here we are. Before we go any further, Jeff, I've been a fan of your work for literally years.
Thank you.
For those who don't know you or your work, would you be willing to do a short, or maybe long, I don't really care, an introduction of some sort to capture who you are, what you've been up to, what NX is up to, etc.?
Sure. I'll go back 10 years and not bore people too much with when I was born. Um, so I used to work at Google on the Angular team, along with the other founder of NX, Victor. So we worked together for a few years. We both decided to leave the company at the same time. We were both going to do our own things, and we decided we might as well work together. So we started an Angular consulting company called Narwhal, and we were both software engineers on the team. And then when we started this company, we were helping large teams at big companies basically upgrade from Angular JS to Angular, the new version of Angular that had come out. And as we started doing that, really within the first 6 months or so, we saw some challenges that teams were having with how they coordinate builds, how they coordinate code sharing, how they deploy and integrate, all these things that are solved pretty well by monorepos. We just came out of Google, which of course is, as a lot of people know, has probably the biggest monorepo in existence, where basically everything in the company is in a single repository, and
Wow.
they've got lots of tooling to support it. There wasn't a lot of tooling outside the company to support it. And so we started building NX as a solution for, I guess I'm giving my company history, but my own history is intertwined with my company history. So NX is so we started building this tool to help first Angular projects and then JavaScript projects and then any kind of projects. And it's just evolved over the years by us working with consulting companies, or not consulting companies, customer companies, as we're consulting with them and learning from all the things that we can do to make the tool better, rather than us kind of living in a bubble or vacuum, building a tool that we think will solve for folks. And we still, even though we're product driven now, we still have very high touch customer relationships to make sure we're still building a thing that's solving real problems. So I don't have any personal history. It's just my company history. And I used to write code. Now I manage. I get involved with tech, but I don't write much code, and I
Yeah.
manage all the other stuff while Victor has the fun stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I understand now, actually, because NX is a project that is known and loved by so many web developers. However, and I know this by talking to the community. I spend a lot of time at conferences and so on, but also talking to your team. A number of the NX folks are good friends of mine. I think of Yuri, for example. What a great person. And
Yeah, we put a pretty
one
good
of
team together. That's one of the hardest things to do, but it's paid off.
Yeah, and one of the things I keep hearing that's sort of a tough nut for NX to crack, so to speak, and I'd love to get your take on this, is this like close association, this affinity with Angular. A lot of people, I mean, you mentioned it came from
Yeah.
working at Google on the Angular team, and nowadays I spend a lot of time in React and Solid.js and Astro Circles, and anytime NX comes up, there's always that one person who goes, "Oh, I thought that was a Angular thing."
Yeah. I still hear it too.
Yeah. What I understand where that comes from, but how are y'all like working to differentiate against that?
So it's something I've dealt with in every open source project. Is that when you have some kind of big event, like if we announced React support for the first time, for example, you have a lot of attention at that time, and people have the first impressions. I mean, we all know that first impressions matter so much, and at that time, there was still Angular artifacts in the repository. Like we had a file called angular.json, I think, before we renamed it to nx.json. And so there were still things where it's like, okay, yeah, they say React, but it's still kind of Angular. And we hired a bunch of React people and like really went all in on React. It wasn't just Angular people building a tool for people we don't understand. And so having been in other projects where first impressions have lasted a long time, I kind of knew it would be hard, and it really is one of those things that you just have to be persistent, and we've been persistent for a long time. There are still people who, if you're not really connected or plugged in and like keeping up with everything, then I think you'll probably there will always be those people who aren't familiar with what it is now. Like a lot of people don't know it's a polyglot build system now. We're doing more to get into those communities to make it clear that, like we just released a Gradle plugin that's super simple and powerful, and we're building more first-class plugins like that. So The Angular team is also going through this kind of thing right now, where they've got a lot of baggage in their reputation that they're looking to shed, and we're pretty good friends with the Angular team, and kind of talk about the same things, like how do we work around this? And really, it's the same answer for anything in a open source project you want to make successful, is that you just got to keep doing, you got to keep showing up, you got to keep spreading the word, you got to keep saying the same things until it sticks and spreads, and then you deal with some kind of diminishing returns on the edges that some people will never really be up to date.
Yeah, and you've got to amen to that, and you've got to also show up and deliver the value as well, right? And I've seen NX to be a really valuable tool myself. I mean, I think it's most widely known for monorepos support, and I want to, maybe we can talk about that for the people who aren't as initiated. But there's also value that I've seen from NX in like large scale migrations. It's an excellent code mod runner, and this comes from before NX. I used to use Babel to write code mods and shift major portions of code from one thing to another thing. But what I heard recently from folks like, I think, Miroslav was telling me that React 19 is almost generally available. I think it's a release candidate at this point in time. And it comes, when you use it with the React compiler, all of your use memo and your memoization is no longer needed, so to speak. And that's a pretty big breaking change. What I understand from NX is that it has the ability to just remove that code from your code base through some type of plugin. And the reason it can do this is with the plugin system. Am I accurate so far?
You got it. Exactly right.
Yeah. Now you mentioned this polyglot thing. I think this is cool because I've used NX extensively in the TypeScript and JavaScript ecosystem. When you say polyglot, I hear you can use NX for code bases of other programming languages as well, like Rust and COBOL, depending on if there are plugins for it. Is that true?
So that's not true, but that is another thing that we have to shed you can actually, it's easier if there's a plugin. So NX at its core is a generic tool. It doesn't know anything about any language or any system. It used to be tightly coupled, where it was just like TypeScript and everything in it. And then we gradually separated it out to make it where every plugin has access to the same API, so you can give the same power to any language, like the automatically creating the graph of projects and setting up builds and things like that. So with other languages, as long as you've got, like, the easiest thing is if you've got a bash script that runs it, you can just tell NX, hey, run this script. Don't worry about what you're building. Just use this, and you'll get the benefits of NX understanding how the task order, how it can be cached, as long as you just say, hey, here's where the files are going. It's going to record the process output, so it can still replay everything. It can distribute the work in the magic way that we distribute CI work, and it just gets easier with a plugin. Like we have the React plugin, for example, and with a plugin you get the magical things like code mods, where we call them migrations, where you can have a series of steps of code mods that run when upgrading from one version of the plugin to the other, and it'll say, okay, what version did they last update at, and then run all the migrations between then and now. And if we do it for things that are deterministic, if that's the right word, where we know we're doing the right thing. We don't guess, so we go as far as we safely can, and then we give some advice on how to take it across the finish line if there are more suspicious breaking changes that we're a little careful about. But and the other thing is we have build tools and scaffolding in general. So we have different options for like Webpack with different plugins if you have some preference. And then we have like component generators, route generators for React, Next, Angular, all the different things we have first class plugin support for. That's a pretty powerful thin that we also undersell, is that a lot of teams build their own plugins to compose our plugins to say, okay, when our team develops a component, it's going to develop this React component. It's going to scaffold these Cypress tests. It's going to scaffold these Jest tests. We're going to set up Storybook and all this. So you can compose all the different generators we have to do something creative and enforce some kind of standards and consistency within your company. So so that's why we talk a lot about the build side of NX, how we build things fast, all these optimizations, but we really undersell this other side, which is stuff that really is needed to help a team scale and help a code base scale. That without it, you're pretty limited in how far you can grow your code base without pulling your hair out.
Yeah. I agree with you because every time I've heard NX, and this is I think where a lot of the listeners' ears will perk up because this was my in to NX, and I hope that things have improved over time. But from what I hear from the community,
maybe
yeah,
not.
exactly. What I hear from the community is this is other people's into NX, even as recently as like early 2024, which is monorepos are hard. And I'm building a project. I want a monorepo because I want to keep my like web UI and my data layer and everything like in this one repo. Which that's another thing I want to get your thoughts on eventually is like what is the boundary for isolating components in a monorepo? But that's maybe a discussion for later. Anyway, the in that people have is I need a monorepo. Okay, do I go with Turbo or do I go with NX? Okay, I'm going to use NX. And it does, as you mentioned, the scaffolding, the linking, etc., and sets you up for success. With the main thesis being monorepos are hard. We're going to automate a lot of the processes around it for you. That's the in that I've heard the most from people, and that was my in. So can we outline, just to start the basis of a discussion, can we outline what other maybe avenues into NX there are, but also what other benefits NX gives you? And we've already mentioned some of these, right? Like, for example, running migrations from major version A to major version C, and it will maybe do the intermediary B for you.
Yeah.
For example, it will scaffold things. You mentioned some CI optimizations as well. Can we get like broad spectrum value adds outside of monorepos are hot? I'm going to use NX.
Cool. Yeah. Lots of. So should I ignore the monorepos are hard question for now and say what NX is, or should I give my opinion on that?
Whatever you want. I mean, that's what I've heard, and maybe monorepos aren't hard. I'm happy. Yeah,
but
okay.
I think they're hard because they're so different from how people are used to working. Or like monorepos used to be the default. Like we did trunk based development back in the 2000s, and it was painful because it was disorganized. Things like builds were not consistent. It was just kind of like thrown together, and there was nothing like package managers, or they weren't very sophisticated and not consistent across.
Can I interrupt here a little bit?
Yeah.
Because also, I think this concept of monorepos, and now we're talking really about monoliths as well, are hard because as a front end engineer on a team, maybe you push something to your GitHub repo, and it turns out the build fails, but not because something on the front end side was broken, but because some random Golang code that you've never touched broke. And this is probably also like attributing to this monorepos are hard. Yeah. And as you mentioned, maybe it's different now. So are they still hard?
No,
are they easier?
That is very much the case, and it is a transition. So I guess I'll define monorepo how we define it, because it can mean different things, and it's really subjective to the organization using it, how hard it is, and what things they have to adapt to. We used to, like when we first started, we kind of just went with the traditional definition of monorepo, where it's like, okay, this whole unit, like a company or an org, has a repository that everything goes into. NX, we've made it where it's really just focused on structured repositories and repositories that can scale. And then we have customers who are using it in all sorts of different ways. We don't have any customer who's using it as a single NX workspace for their whole company. Every customer we have is like, they figure out what the boundary is. Okay, these teams are working closely together. Let's get them in an NX workspace so they're constantly integrated. They're sharing the same version. Everything's compatible. Sharing versions of third-party plugins and libraries. I mean, so that's how we think about NX in monorepos, and that's like nobody knows that's how we think of it. Like we don't spend too much time, like we do in our docs, but we don't evangelize too much to say no. Let's invent another word like magic repo or something that's or unicorn repo to go with the narwhal theme. But so that what really, and this is what a lot of our consulting became, us helping companies figure out what those boundaries should be with their
Wow.
workspace to say, okay, let's maybe try with these teams getting in there because they're constantly, like, the design system and the main app are constantly working together. Let's just get them in the same repo and then see if it's good and then attract other teams. But there are a lot of things, like you mentioned, if somebody's build or test fails and it has nothing to do with you, but happen to be in the graph that's being built right now, and they're offline because they're in a different time zone, that can be pretty frustrating. And that's one of the things that you really have to develop better habits if you're going to be in a monorepo together. A lot of teams
Yeah.
already have really good testing, and so that isn't that much of an issue. But a lot of teams, it's like, yeah, we know the build. We don't have full test coverage because we've been in a poly repo by ourselves and haven't, like, we know how things work and we aren't too worried about it. But then when you move into the monorepo, other variables get introduced. Maybe you have some flakes or some failures. We do account for some of that. Like in our NX Cloud product, we have some deflaking abilities to where we can detect flaky tests and rerun just that test to hopefully deflake it without having to start a new CI run. But that is a good example of things. One of the habits that has to change when you do move into a monorepo with many teams, if you've never worked in a monorepo before. At Google, we've broken the whole monorepo a couple times on the Angular team because we would merge in Angular every day to merge it into, like, Google 3, the Google monorepo. And we ran tests against everything that we were merging, but sometimes we messed up to where we didn't test the right thing at the right time, and we would merge it, and then there's been at least one time where the whole monorepo was at a standstill because we merged something that broke. And so it was
No.
about half an hour, I think. And this was probably the worst day of Matthias Niemela's life because he's the one who everyone was pinging because his name was on the commit. So if you imagine tens of thousands of developers looking at you saying you broke the monorepo, it's not fun, but it's rare. So you will every once in a while have a breakage. You can if you rely completely on automation, yeah, you can't merge that. But like, teams need to come up with policies to say, okay, we're transitioning to this point where we want to be much better. Until we're at that point, if we see a failing test, if it doesn't look relevant, I'm going to disable that test and merge my things so we stay green, and then you're going to need to come and fix this test. You just figure things out like that, and that's a lot of what we've been helping teams do over the years, is figuring out what works for them.
Wait, so that means if I understand you correctly, there isn't a strong enough or a strong period guideline for what constitutes a monorepo, because it sounds like just functional organization of polyrepos that have a lot of overlap. And this is such a good thing to define here on the podcast because I like the number of people I've spoken to, and also the number of things I've understood myself about a monorepo is so variable. What I mean by that is, if you consider like Lodash, for example, so it's a monorepo. It's a monorepo where
Yeah.
every Lodash plugin has a directory, has a package JSON, etc. And it's a library based monorepo where each workspace, as it were, in the monorepo exports a function or exports a module like Lodash slash merge slash
Yeah.
sort slash
Yeah,
whatever.
definitely.
So that's one type of monorepo, and the other type of monorepo I alluded to earlier, which is some people, maybe even Google, puts the entire thing in a single repo. So the backend, the Docker, the Redis, the whatever, the front end, etc. And what you're talking about here, from the experience of NX customers, is no. There's no hard and fast rule. It's just if there's overlap between 2+ poly repos, then the suggestion is we'll try them out as a monorepo. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's a good way of
Wow.
saying it. That's the biggest factor in determining how things should go together. And then there's other organizational idiosyncrasies that we take into account. This is a good time to plug a website we built along with some other build tool makers called monorepo.tools. And we actually define, like, we came up with a common definition of what, like, we and folks working on Bazel and other projects think it. And so on here it says, a monorepo is a single repository containing multiple distinct projects with well-defined relationships. I think I wrote that, actually. Or Victor probably wrote the bad version, and then I made it a little better.
Okay. Yeah,
But
multiple distinct projects with well-defined relationships.
but you're right.
Fantastic.
Lodash, like we call those package-based monorepos. Anything that's like many packages, which they're monorepos. They're just a different kind than we optimize for. You can very easily use NX for the same kind of repos, or you can use Lerna, which we also maintain. If you are using Lerna, then you get some of the power of NX underneath it. But we focus on, I forget what we call it. I call it graph-based
Project-based?
monorepos.
Okay, graph-based, yeah.
So like instead of a list of packages that's somewhat flat, we tend to have a complex graph of dependencies between libraries and projects, and it's actually something you might see 5 packages in a package-based monorepo might end up being 25 projects in a monorepo, because projects are such low overhead. They're not something you have to publish or version. You just depend on the master on all of them. And so that's what we focus on. That's what application developers benefit a lot more from. The open source developers, package-based makes sense most of the time because you're publishing public packages. And we could get into, like, organizations sometimes publish their internal packages, which is a good thing. But even so, it tends to be a mix of some packages in the repository get published. Most of the repository doesn't get published. It stays within the repository.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. I feel like richer in my understanding of monorepos now, which is kind of mission accomplished for the podcast. Okay, so we talked a little bit about monorepos being hard and complex, and we established a definition. What's the sort of broad spectrum value add of NX outside of tools for monorepos for success?
Yeah, so I'd say, like, we own the first couple steps of the development lifecycle. So we own when I say we own, we take ownership of making this good. Not that we like own it for everybody. So we focus on the first steps of, like, development and then integration and deployment, and all those things are things that we have some affordances for, but we don't build a lot of tooling for. And so on the development side, we focus on things that help teams grow. And so a lot of that is things like I mentioned. Plugins are being a thing where you can keep code consistent. You can even publish those plugins so other NX workspaces outside of yours can be consistent. But we also help with things like we have boundaries between projects. Like with TypeScript projects, we have something where there's essentially a barrel file where you can't import deep imports from within that, so you can keep private things private. And we have, but we do understand this graph of how these projects work together, and we can infer that based on imports. So this project is importing from this barrel, from this project, and we create this graph for you, and you can actually see the graph and interact with it and understand things if you're making a large-scale change. That seems like a gimmick, but is actually really useful that you have this interactive graph to understand your workspace, especially for people who aren't in your workspace every day, who need to contribute something. But the more powerful part of that is we have a tagging system that allows you to define arbitrary relationships between projects, where you can tag a project and say, okay, this project is experimental, and you can make it so other projects can't depend on experimental projects, or like I can explicitly allow the projects that depend on me, so that I'm not supporting people I don't want to support. Like things like that you need in a monorepo to avoid stepping on each other's toes, frustrating each other. These are things they're not new ideas. They're just things we've made easy, we think, with NX, or a lot simpler. And but it's a bunch of little details like that. And the graph, of course, is used for a lot of, once we get into the integration side, we use that to know, let's look at the pull requests, let's look at what's changed, then let's look at what could be affected by that change, and then rebuild, retest all those targets that need to be, but ignore things that shouldn't be affected by this change. And that's like the first thing NX did was we made it where you can have multiple projects, but then we made it where you can only build the affected targets. And that was that would make it where on average people could build half their repo and save a lot of compute, save a lot of time in CI. But then we added other things like replay, which again isn't a new idea, but we've just made it simpler, where we cache the outputs of of your builds and tests. Like we cache the file output and the terminal output so that we can just replay it the next time you run at the same hash, and you can also configure that hash. This is similar to what Turborepo does. So they have task orchestration and caching. That's pretty much the same idea. And that will get you the next way. It's like, okay, if this was affected, but the hash still matches something in the cache, then we can just replay that. And then the third layer of defense is we use the knowledge of the graph to know how to distribute the work across many machines. So in our NX Cloud product, we have what we call NX Agents, which is our compute product, where if you just add a line of configuration to say use agents for this, and then we're going to look at your graph, we're going to look at what's being built. We know how long tasks take. We know what machines you're provisioning. We know how things depend on each other, and so we farm that across whatever agents we can spin up, and try to get them all to finish at about the same time. That's the goal. Is you don't want any one agent to be like 1 minute and another one is 50 minutes. We do everything we can to get them running at the same time, and we do things like, I don't want to go too much into thing if it's not interesting to folks, but I'll say one more thing about how we make builds fast is we also have this new thing called atomizer, where we take things that can be split by file and run and distributed and just do that and just split them across many machines. End-to-end tests are the biggest example, because if anyone's worked in CI, you probably know that end-to-end tests tend to be the biggest culprit in like extending the runtime of a CI, which they're pretty important. If you have a monorepo, you want to have good coverage. What we do with Atomizer is give you the option to say, hey, atomize this, and then we'll split it based on files, because usually it's within an end-to-end test, the file is important to run in order, but usually the files themselves don't need to run in order, but it is an opt-in thing in case you do have some kind of setup that way. But then that makes it where we can really distribute those tests across, if you've got 10 agents, we can say, okay, instead of a 35-minute end-to-end test run, then we can cut it down to a few minutes and bring your CI down quite a bit. Like, it's not unusual for us to go into an existing NX monorepo, help them with a couple things, and see like a 70% improvement in time saved on average CI, and even worst case CI when you have to rebuild everything.
That's incredible. So if I understand correctly, instead of running all of the end-to-end tests on one agent, you have the possibility to break. If you have 35 end-to-end tests, you get 35 agents, and you can run all of them in parallel.
Yep.
Wow,
yeah,
that is so.
And it runs it, so it does it by file, because that tends to be the safe boundary.
Yeah, because every end-to-end test, at least the ones that I've seen, you have a before each, the bootstrapper, and then you run the tests, and then you clean up.
Before
incredible.
each. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. And this is why I think it's important to capture the sort of broad spectrum of features of NX, because again, I feel like it's disproportionately valued. People value it for, okay, I can scaffold a bunch of stuff, I can run plugins, and I can
people choose one thing they like most about it, and that's fine.
Yeah, but I think in a podcast that aims to capture the detail and the nuance, let's get everything.
Okay.
And I thank you so much for that. About caching the assets, for example, you mentioned, we build up to a certain hash and then this lives somewhere. Where do the cached artifacts live? Is that an NX Cloud exclusive feature, or is it available to me on like GitHub? Can I store those cached outputs somewhere?
So the caching is the easiest part of our optimizations, and it actually locally works without cloud. So we have the cloud is where you want to let us distribute it for you across your team or whatever machines are connecting to it, and you want to add some constraints on how it's shared and written to. And people write their own cache sharing mechanisms, and it's not that hard to do. Like it just goes into, by default, goes into node modules. I forget what the folder is, but but you can configure that to be somewhere else, and you can make it a shared folder or whatever, and it'll work most of the time okay. If you want to make it easily shared across environments so that what CI has already done, you can benefit from next time you spin up your local build, then NX Cloud makes it just really easy to use.
Could I say the cached output, instead of going to like node module / dot something, store the cached outputs in my GitHub, in my Git repo, excuse me. So like I have a directory cache and I commit to that and push it. And then I get the same benefit as what NX Cloud would give me with my team, meaning they can spin up local from my cache build and CI's cache build as well.
You could. I guess that would be safe because everything's hashed, so you wouldn't have any collisions from different people pushing stuff on the team. So I think you could do that. I'd have to think about it if there's any downsides to that.
There probably is because I just came up with it after hearing about it from you for 10 seconds. But
and it's like similar to downsides of committing your node packages. It's like, okay, you just have a lot more stuff being merged every time. And
I'm glad I'm sort of on the right track here with picking up what you're putting down. You mentioned NX also has features that help with deflaking tests. I would love to understand this in more detail. Maybe for the listeners, we can start by outlining what are flaky tests, and then we can talk about how NX deflakes them.
Yeah. So flaky tests are. I'll give my definition, and I'm sure other testing nerds will find flaws in it. But tests that run that indeterministically fail or pass. So they sometimes pass, they sometimes fail. It's not related to anything. You can run it with the same inputs many times, and it won't always do the same thing. It's not a pure function. That's another one that'll get math nerds on me. So what we do is we detect this. We see, okay, this one test of this suite is failing often, or like fails every once in a while. Doesn't like it if it runs again without its inputs changing. We definitely know it's flaky. And like if the projects it depends on haven't changed and it's still doing that, then we definitely know it's flaky. There are probably other heuristics we're using that I don't know about, but this is like the main theory. And then we will rerun that suite to. I think we rerun the whole file. I need to get better at that. I need to understand that better. But we just released this a couple months ago. But yeah, so we do run only what needs to be run, so that you're not like if you don't have tooling like this, you would see something fail and it's like, okay, do I have to run the whole build again? Can I just rerun this one part? You don't have to do anything. NX will just rerun it for you and will let you know that this was flaky. We're rerunning it, but you don't have to figure out how to rebuild everything without waiting another hour for changes to be validated. You can just wait as long as that test spec takes.
Incredible. So it will rerun it and warn you, hey, this may be flaky because it passed last time and nothing changed.
Yeah. And these are ideas we didn't invent. We've just worked in good monorepos that have these kind of concepts, and again, just made them a lot easier, we think, or a lot more applicable to the real people who don't have super crazy tens of thousands of engineers monorepos.
Yeah, I want to not push necessarily, but I want to pull on that thread a little bit more and ask about this, because I think from everyone I talked about NX, sure, it's the whole monorepo discussion, but there's also the broad understanding that NX fundamentally is a developer experience tool. It is a DX tool. And it's just known. Everyone I speak to, even I was at React Miami in 2022 and y'all had a booth and, I showed up to the NX booth.
I was there. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And that's where we met. And I think that's the salient feature of NX, really, is that it just understands good developer experience and knows what developers want. How do you do that? How does NX do that? How does the team do that? Is it just, we felt the pain at Google? We know what is required because we've wished a tool like this exists, or even better, we've faced these similar problems with our consulting clients, and we think so. How does one arrive at ideal DX? I guess is my question here.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think Victor and I, since we both have a lot of background in open source, which I didn't talk about it at all, but like I worked on open source things, a couple of companies before Google and then at Google. And so we've been around and we kind of know the discipline you need to have with open source. And the biggest thing I think is focus. Like you need to know what the scope of your thing is and know what to say no to. Because there are lots of things that we could do, but we need to have some kind of filter to determine, does this belong in NX? Should we just build something that enables this? which is usually what we try to do. We have a pretty high bar for, do we build a first class thing that we're going to have to maintain? So I think that's the biggest thing of any successful open source project, is they know what doesn't belong in the project. And that's probably changed over the years. Like, our philosophy has changed to where it used to be a lot more prescriptive of like, here's the stack you get with NX. And now it's a lot more like, no, we don't care. We care about how things are done, and we care about enabling things, but we're not going to tell you what frameworks, what testing tools to use. We're just going to make it easy for you to use those things. So I think that's like, Victor is a Superman. If anyone doesn't know who Victor is, he's very sharp and very, he's very computer sciencey, I guess is the best way to put it. Like he thinks about things very concretely and clearly. I think I do too, but he's just a lot deeper into it. And so I think him and the team we've built are just really good at deciding how things should be, like giving criticism to something if the experience could be better. We're just a very collaborative team, very like wanting to do the best work we can. And so I think that all that stuff together is how we end up with a pretty good experience for a tool that's pretty powerful and pretty broad in what it does.
Yeah, but how do you measure it, I guess is my question. And I ask because this is something you put on X recently, where you said, and I love this. You quote tweeted this meme from Chef, the HBO series, and it was, the caption was, you use NX, and it was this guy from Chef going
trolling tweet.
Yeah, the trolling tweet. And you mentioned there are some legit gripes in these replies, and you said we'll launch a major change soon in NX to address the most common complaints. First of all, I want to tip my hat to that level of caring. But the follow-up question is, cool, you listen to the community, but you said knowing what to say no to was important. So I assume that's what you've done there, and you've sort of got now a curated list of what changes we're going to make. But also, how then do you validate, this developer experience, this is good? Is it just community feedback driven? Is there an internal, like, let's use this for a week and then see how it feels? Because ultimately, I feel like DX is subjective. It's like UX. And you cast a shot in the dark and you hope that it resonates with the vast majority of developers. But as far as I know, there isn't like a hard and fast rule, like use Aura for your spinners. Like, that doesn't exist, right? So
how do we measure it?
How do you measure that your best DX is actually as good as you want it to be?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a thing that's hard to measure. That we can measure the reception of it with users, and that's real. Like, we're our own dog fooders, so we eat our own dog food. We use NX for our own things. We have our own internal monorepo where we build cloud and all of our other stuff, and so we use it. The team, we also, like, when you hire people to work on a build system, you get like a particular kind of person who's usually, like, they have a clear idea how they want something to work, and so you get good feedback from our team, because we're always saying, okay, what if we did this? What, like, this other tool I've used does something like this way. I thought that was pretty clever. So we try to get it as right as we can when we're just experimenting and doing it internally. But the other benefit we have is we have customers who we work closely with, especially we have enterprise customers that we have formal relationships with, that we support. And a lot of times the thing we're building is something that they've been asking for. And so we get them to try it before we actually publish it and make sure it's solving the problem in a way that's easy. So I guess to how we do it is that way. How we measure it is, like, the only way we have been measuring it has been to, like, we survey customers. We'll just informally ask them about things. The best customers are the ones who just give us feedback. We love people who complain, and I don't think that's necessarily a measure so much as an indicator that something could be improved. But that's very valuable in itself. And fortunately, we have a lot of customers who are happy to complain, and we're happy to receive it and make the product better.
That's so great. Yeah, I think the best, I agree. I think the the thing that hurts is often the thing worth paying attention to. You stub your toe and you pay attention to your toe because it's just
Mhm.
been stubbed, right? So in keeping with that, and adding this like troll tweet to it, what were some of the biggest complaints people posted on
Oh
social
man, I have to open it
that
up.
resonated?
Do you have it open right now?
I
Uh,
don't, but we don't have to. I mean,
well,
be so detailed about it.
yeah, I'm trying to remember what
Here,
I
okay, I actually do have it open now. I opened it.
okay.
I can share some with you, and then you can tell
Yeah,
me. One person said everyone who has nice things to say about NX is an Angular dev. There's something to that.
that's not
Um,
true.
yeah,
But yeah,
I'm
I
not
get
an
it.
Angular
I
dev.
think Angular was the like we had a pretty good relationship in the Angular community, so I'd say they are maybe more enthusiastic because they've been using it longer. It's kind of similar to Angular CLI that they grew up with. So I'd say that doesn't surprise me that someone has that experience. But our experience is I think most people using NX are React and very happy, even if some things are broken, and hopefully that's not the case.
Yeah,
People tend to say, "Yeah, it's working. We're really glad we started using NX."
yeah, it's interesting because going through these replies, and to be fair, I didn't go through the replies earlier because I wanted to ask you what you thought, but I'm actually not seeing anything bad about NX.
There,
Except what I am seeing is tribalism with people just hating NX because they care too much about Turbo. Um,
yeah, I think that
yeah.
one was Moonrepo. Uh, One of the Moonrepo. I don't think he works on it, but he's just like affiliated or friends with the Moonrepo.
Mm,
Miles, I think. I forget. It was the Shellscape guy who tweeted it. I forget his name,
yeah.
but yeah, I
Um,
think one of the things that was probably in that thread was, and one thing we've been working on is GitHub issues. We get a lot of
mhm.
GitHub issues, a lot of pull requests, and we've been kind of lackadaisical about it. That we lackadaisical means just like for non-native speakers, it's like we've just kind of been informal. We've been kind of ad hoc in how we manage issues and pull requests, and that's frustrating to people. And I get it. I'm frustrated if I open an issue and no one says anything to even say, okay, yeah, this is legit, or to say, can you reproduce it? It's like, yeah, give me something. We hadn't been doing a very good job of that. The open source team has been working on getting a process, which I think is much better now. That we actually have some kind of formalization to make sure people are getting feedback, to especially give attention to pull requests because that takes even more effort for people to do. And so I think there were some people who saying, yeah, I opened the pull request and nobody said anything. Like, this issue is still not fixed. I mean, we can
Yeah.
make lots of excuses about, we've got these other things to do. Like, we were working on a big refactoring of how plugins are built to make it a lot simpler. That we called that Project Crystal. And that was one reason we were holding off on merging pull requests and things, but we didn't communicate that to anybody. We
Yeah.
just kind of were doing the work and leaving it to them to figure out. And that is something that we've made a lot of progress on. I think we need to do a measurement, a temperature check to see are people less frustrated with it. But that's a
Yeah.
longer time horizon that you can actually measure. Like, are people complaining about this still?
Yeah, for sure. And amen to what you said. I mean, I respect a lot that you've recognized that because, like, a friend of mine, one of the most talented TypeScript engineers I know, tried once to contribute. I think it was either to Gatsby or Prisma, one of these repos years ago, and for the same reason, the team was very heads down working on features. They weren't very good with their issue and pull request management, and so he opened an issue and nothing happened. And then 1 year later, went back to the issue, nothing happened. And so he, for subsequent years, has been wishing his own GitHub issue happy birthday on the same thread. And so I love that this is a focus for y'all, and I think it is a good service to the community. I want to talk to you a little bit about tooling because NX is a tool. You mentioned recently that every programmer should build at least one Lexer parser compiler and rich text editor in their lifetime. Um, I love that. I love my compiler theory. We have an episode actually of the podcast where we talk like deeply about computing, all the way from like legitimately first principles, like electrons and the flow of electrons to make electricity, and then electricity in a semiconductor, and TCP packets, and all of like
Yeah.
from there, right? So huge fan of this. I in practice have built Lexers, parsers, compilers, and rich text editors. Although for the rich text editor, I did cheat a little bit and use a pre-baked WYSIWYG editor
Mhm.
once. In any case, it was Tiny MCE, which was very
Yeah, yeah,
pluggable
yeah.
back in
That
the
was a
day.
popular one.
But I'm curious, where did this come from? I generally think this is really great advice because it teaches you the fundamentals of how things work. It brings you back to first principles. But I'm curious if you could elaborate a little bit on that. What is the benefit of building a Lexer parser compiler and rich text editor, and is it what I think it is?
So I'm trying to think where, like, this is something that has been kind of an inside joke for, I think, people working on Angular, because Angular, we rewrote Lexers, parsers, compilers so many times for AngularJS and Angular that's like, it kind of was a thing that everybody in the team would end up touching at some point. But I think it is a serious benefit, like you mentioned. I think the biggest benefit is you see how things work under the covers. You see that it's not magical. It gives you more confidence as a developer of, okay, I know how this code is going to be interpreted and compiled, and it's just other code that's making this happen. And like I understand things. I know how to do this, and I can
Yeah.
not be so intimidated as maybe a new developer. Rich text editor I just threw in there because it's fun, because it's a totally different type of challenge. It's got a UI to it for one, like a WYSIWYG or whatever, but those kinds of things are pretty fun and challenge your brain in a different way. Like you're managing more complex state, you're parsing more complex pieces of text. You have to figure out how to structure the content within the editor. So it was kind of. I don't know anyone else who would say that, but I think rich text editor is a good thing for anyone to try their hand at.
Yeah, to implement. I think the listeners here maybe haven't done that, haven't written a Lexer, haven't written a parser, etc.
I've never written a good one, for what it's worth.
Well, same. Depending. I mean, for me, it was good enough to meet my need and whatever, And so sometimes good enough is actually good. But I'm curious if we can teach the listeners together about these things, about Lexers, parsers, compilers, and rich text editors. So, in your own words, would you be willing to do that just over the next few minutes?
I always forget the process of the. I'll try, but this again is going to offend any like computer science nerds out there.
It's I'm happy to do so because I have a policy on this podcast. Just by the way, when somebody comes in and does the well actually thing, my response is, why don't you come and talk to me about it for 2 hours? So if anybody ends up giving you trouble for anything here, we'll hear from them as a guest and we'll talk about it.
So so for basically Lexer and parser, they work kind of together, where the one creates the tokens and the other analyzes the tokens. I think it's the Lexer that like tokenizes the plain inputs, like the code inputs. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't programmed in years.
Yeah, you run a business. You're too busy for that. From what I know, and again, this is not like always check your sources. We'll put actual links in the show notes to declarative to empirical sources here. But it starts as a string, a text file, and a tokenizer converts semantic words into tokens, so const, let, etc. And a Lexer adds state to those. So it creates stateful tokens. For example, this portion of the code has a state in that it's nested. It is a nested function that is in the closure scope of another function. So a Lexer is like a stateful tokenizer, you can say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A contextual
and
tokenizer.
Correct. Yeah. So what's a parser?
So it's the thing that actually understands the code that's being.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I want to look up the definitions because I'm so insecure about saying the wrong thing here.
I love this so much because the listeners of this podcast would be like, oh my goodness, it's Jeff Cross, the CEO, who has no insecurities. And this is why we do Founder CEO Season, right? It's folks to show people that people in tech are more or less all the same. There is no sort of value hierarchy, so to speak. And I hope this doesn't offend you, but I feel like we're all engineers, and sometimes we don't remember the details, and that's okay because like we still create valuable software. So anyway, yes, if you've looked it up, I'd love if you can share it with us.
I'll just say the two together, or how
Perfect.
they're used. And one is, and this is like short of the compiler actually turning it into something else. But so they take the string, like you said, they take some kind of string input. In our case, in Angular's case, it would be like template code, and it would actually analyze the templates or your HTML files, and it would look for Angular symbols in there. I mean, it would Lex the whole thing, it would parse everything, and then figure out, okay, where are they using Angular bindings in here for data binding or for interpolation or for repeating, for what structural directives, all these things that Angular would do with components.
These are things like ngIf and ngFor. Things like that.
Yeah, exactly. The repeaters, the structural, those are the big ones, ngIf and ngFor. So that was most of what the parser for Angular was doing. We used other parsers for the actual JavaScript code, and we could get things out of that. Especially we use TypeScript a lot in our later compilers. But so you get that, and you get these useful tokens that you have the context of, and and you start to analyze, and you create other bindings or you create some kind of output in a later step of, okay, this is a binding here, so I'm going to create the actual function that represents this binding behind the scenes. I'm going to set the listener on this element because they're binding to it, or binding to an event of that element. That's basically what they do, but Lexers are all different. So this was on the Angular team. We worked on Lexers and parsers to just understand template code, HTML code, because that was most of Angular's power was in the templates.
Yeah, and this also finds itself now in NX itself as a product, right? The way you run plugins and code migrations is you hook into the Lexer parser, probably not the compiler, because actually yes, the compiler, because the compiler will produce a syntax tree that then you manipulate. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the migrations and the generators are all AST aware. They're all they understand the code. So it's not just string manipulation like a lot of scaffolding. Like earlier scaffolding was just strings, like dump a string in here at the end of the file or like whatever. Ours actually understands the code we're changing.
And again, by understands the code, it compiles and produces you said AST, that for the listeners, that's an abstract syntax tree. It's a tree of, and this is an object, and this is a member of the object, and this is the value of that object member. It's if anyone's interested who is listening to the podcast, we'll also put a link in the show notes. ASTExplorer.net is great because you just paste in some JavaScript code and it gives you the syntax tree. That's what the compiler produces. Thank you, Jeff, for going on this deep dive. I think it does help eliminate imposter syndrome, which is sort of the theme of the podcast on many levels, right? On the one level, people actually learn, but on the other level, people learn that you don't have to have the perfect textbook definition answer every single time, because we live in an age where you can just like Google stuff. Yeah. And indeed, that's what we're doing. Okay,
different people are good at different things. I tend to go broad on things I know, and then a lot of folks tend to go deep, which is both good. Victor always talks about T-shaped people, where you're broad on many things, so you understand a lot of what's happening in the world or in this particular domain, but you go deep on one part of it, and so that's there are a couple of things I go deep on, but I'm kind of have a low attention span, so I'm always looking at new things and trying to pick up new things. I always go from one hobby to another, so it's. So it's I know a little about a lot of things and a lot about a few things.
You're the CEO of NX. You run the company, and you're also an engineer.
Victor and I co-run the company. Basically, I'm the one who filed the corporation paperwork, so I made myself CEO. Okay. But we have pretty different focuses, but
yes, this was my next question. As an engineer, as an executive officer, what is your focus? Is it fundraising, team building? Is Victor I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah. So it's easier to say Victor's role Victor is basically responsible for the product, all the technical stuff, and I'm responsible for everything else. And the thing we work together most on is product, talking about strategy, go to market for different things, marketing. My job is, like, these days it has been a lot of like building the team. When we're fundraising, that does take a lot of my time, and I handle all of that. And Victor shows up and smiles and waves at the meetings. I'm just kidding. Victor does more than that. He gives a thumbs up. I manage the executive team and sales and finance and operations, customer success. Marketing
Right.
also is kind of shared between us, but that's kind of how it worked out. And we just kind of, when we started the company, we were both doing the same thing. And Victor, I mean, I worked with him. I knew he was just like super prolific and super sharp, and
Yeah.
like he's the person who needs to be doing the architecture, the leadership on that end. And I had experience running businesses and know how to do things in America and all that. So I just gradually kind of became
Awesome.
more the business side of things. Had to learn a lot along the way, but that's kind of how the company works.
I want to, in the next few minutes, talk about that specifically, about running a business, because the podcast is listened to by like really entrepreneurial tech people who have a background in open source and who maybe are thinking of like just applying to YC or taking that next step, but are scared. You know, they're on the precipice, excuse me. And so I would love to get your input there.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you about, in the context of running the business, this is CEO and co-founder season, and we've heard from Glauber Costa, so the CEO of Terzo Database. We've heard from Brandon Bayer, CEO of Flight Control, and I think one more, that the hardest problem, period, in running a business or growing a business, a tech business, above and beyond the technical complexity, is the positioning and marketing, is the positioning and messaging, I believe they put it. Like how do we describe this product in a way that people are going to understand it and care
Mhm.
about it? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I've got some battle wounds of like going through these things, trying to figure them out. We go back and forth on things. And so I guess you talked about a few things, and I'll say like the last thing you touched on, like how do you communicate things, is a pretty hard thing for a tool that's as broad as ours. And like, so we don't fit in a category. We are a build system, but we're other things, and we are a scaffolding system and like code management system, but we're other things. So we basically define ourselves by what we solve, and we solve for scaling code bases and teams and everything that comes with that. So we try to find ways. Like monorepo is a good example of, do we really double down on monorepo, even though it's such a ambiguous term with people having different understandings of what it means? Is it actually helpful for us to say monorepo, or does it just put us, like, pigeonhole us into being perceived as,
Right.
oh, yet another monorepo build tool? We currently talk a lot about monorepos, and we do try to disambiguate, but that is one of those things that, again, takes lots of time and persistence to actually get people thinking differently about monorepos. So you also mentioned like founders thinking about starting companies right
Oh no,
now, and
yeah, no, that's clear. I did want to ask about what you do for that reason, like what the journey was like, you know, because you were at Google, you left Google,
yeah.
you started consulting with a bunch of people. Like, so I think of friends Emily Freeman and Rachel, like a bunch of my friends now, they have worked in big tech and
Mhm.
they've left big tech to start consulting businesses.
Mhm.
And you have a head start there. And I think this is not going to stop soon. A number of people are doing that. So I'm curious if you could speak to that experience. What
Yeah.
was that like? Like, I don't know if you knew you were going to start NX from day one,
No, we
or
didn't.
Narwhal. Yeah. So what was that like? Was there ideation? Maybe we could speak to some of the nuance there.
Yeah. So going back to when we decided we were both leaving the team, like Victor and I, we collaborated on stuff. We got along pretty well, had fun working together on the Angular team. And he wanted to move back to Canada, which this was in 2015, 2016, where remote work was just not an option and for the Angular team. And so he was like, well, I'm going to leave and probably just do freelancing. and I had also gotten the itch. I'd started a couple of companies before, and got the itch to get back out of the big tech and get back into something where I could have more immediate impact and more more gratifying results of seeing my action turn into something. Which is something at big tech, like when you're working on open source at big tech, it's very abstract what impact you're having. It's like, okay, I'm building a framework, people are benefiting from it, they're being more productive, I think. But like, it just, why is the company paying me to do this?
Yeah.
But so I really I just have the entrepreneurial itch that I wanted to do something, and I actually was friends with folks from Strong Loop, the Node company, and I was looking at their model with Node, and I was like, man, we could really do something like this for Angular, or I don't know what exactly, but there's got to be something there. And so I was like, maybe I'll just start something like that. And Victor and I got to talking, and we were like, hey, we work together well. Let's give it a try, and let's just come up with some kind of expectations and parameters and things like that. And then we just jumped in, and it's gone really well. Victor and I still like each other. We actually we argue a lot, but it's I guess dispassionate. So we debate things a lot, but we enjoy it, and it's neither of us ever like hang up angry or something like that. So I think he and I we have a similar enough way of getting through information that we work pretty well together. Anyway, getting a little bit off track. So what was important about when we started the company was we had a pretty narrow focus, and so we had a niche that we were the best in the world at. And I think to be a successful consultant, you need to find that. I mean, you can share best in the world with a couple other people, but you need to be one of the best in the world. And we were the best in the world at Angular. And so if you wanted to do an upgrade from AngularJS to Angular, and you needed to figure out all the steps and all these things, then you'd be putting your reputation at risk if you didn't hire us, because why didn't you hire the people who made it to do this? And so that was why we were able to build a consulting business pretty quickly. If we didn't have that edge, it would have taken a lot more. It would have taken a lot longer to build the business and figure out what we wanted to do. So we did know that we wanted to build our own thing. We knew it was risky for us to be dependent on something we don't control, the Angular project and Angular team, which, I won't get into the history of, like, it's been complicated with us running a business with Angular with some folks in the past on the team. So we knew we needed to build our own thing to build the company around. We just didn't know what it would be until we started working with customers, and it was just obvious, okay, we need to build something for this. And first we were just like, yeah, let's just build this one tool, and we'll keep on figuring out what we want to sell. And eventually it just kept evolving, it kept growing, and we figured out, like, we got to a point where it's like, okay, this needs a cloud backend, because we can only go so far with local optimizations. We could do so much more if we actually had a cloud. We can make it a much better experience. And so that's when we kind of shifted from consulting to product, which was a really hard thing to do. And it was actually kind of slow for a couple of years. And then we raised funding and went all in on product, and it's gone faster. Both the development and the financial success of the product. So lots of learnings. I could talk for hours on all the things that I had to learn and hard lessons from that. But the biggest thing is find a niche. Find a niche that you're the best in the world at, and that people are willing to pay for. Like something that people have a pain that you can solve better than anyone else.
That is so valuable. And how cool. I've heard I've been one of the developers who was negatively affected by the transition from AngularJS to Angular.
Wasn't my decision, by the way.
Thanks.
I'm just kidding. I don't know if it was a good or bad idea.
It was a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm really against, like, very strong, like HTMX is good and React is bad, whatever. But, like, I think when you have such a fundamental breaking change that requires people to, I think it was even Dart back then before TypeScript. And if it was TypeScript, the move from AngularJS to Angular, it was with decorate.
We were writing our own language called AtScript for a bit. And,
even worse. And so, I think that was definitely...
The TypeScript team saved us, fortunately. They said, hey, let us help you with this.
Yeah, because there's no way I'm learning Dart to build a web UI,
Oh yeah,
or
that was a
or
different thing.
Flutter.
That's a
Yeah,
whole other history with the team. That we weren't very big into Dart on the team. It was
good.
just Google needed it, so we built the Dart flavor. Like Dart's cool. We just knew it would limit the appeal of Angular if we made Dart the thing.
Yeah, and so I'm happy to hear that it wasn't all negative because a company came out of it, and from there a product, and now we have NX. That's so great. I feel like for listeners, I want everybody to pay attention to what I'm about to say. I think React is in such a similar place. There's a meme. There's a meme that people say React is having its Angular 2 moment.
Yeah, which I get it.
You could anybody listening who's somewhat entrepreneurial could start a business, a consulting business, helping companies move from create React app to a framework like Next.js or something, and then they'll start to recognize, oh, we need somewhere to deploy this, and maybe Vercel, but Vercel is too expensive. Okay, and then they could build a product. That was exactly your path. And the cool thing I love about this is this path is so repeatable because tech keeps breaking and growing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's bad. It's just a consequence of growth that
Yeah.
gives rise to these new businesses. That is so cool. I so appreciate what you've shared there.
And
I want
I just wanted to point out another thing that so I'm friends with folks from Hero Devs if you're familiar with them, and
Yeah.
they've actually found this cool niche in long-term support of projects. So if you don't want to move to the breaking thing, they'll continue supporting security and major bug fixes for things with a subscription for lots of different open source projects. It started with Angular, and I think they were surprised at the demand for it, and they've expanded to several other open source projects. I don't know exactly what is formally announced or whatever they're supporting now, but they've expanded and is a pretty good choice. But yes, if you can be the person who's good at this kind of thing, then you just got to get the word out, and people will definitely hire you to come in. It's a risk, a de-risking thing. So if companies can throw money to de-risk something, then they'll do it. If you can save them 2 months of trial and error of trying to figure out how to upgrade or how to change their code base themselves, that's pretty valuable for a team of 100 developers.
How did you get the word out for Narwhal before it had a product focus?
So fortunately, like Victor and I had given a lot of talks and blog posts, and we were pretty active in the community for Angular. And so when we announced it, there were already people who knew. Like there were insiders, like Angular nerds who like actually understand everything happening with Angular, who saw NX and they immediately started using it and saying, "This is great. This is exactly what I needed." And then we just kind of built it from there and expanded out from that core group, which is how every open source thing works. You get some insiders who are super enthusiastic about it, and they evangelize for you. You go out and you speak yourself, and more people will vouch for you the more they use your product. So it's another one of those things where you just have to keep showing up. You have to keep saying the same thing, and eventually, if you keep it up long enough, and you've got a great product that's actually solving pain, it's almost guaranteed you'll be successful.
I love it.
It's a secret that no one knows. Is you just have to keep going. If you built the right product, you just have to keep going, keep on putting stuff out there.
Yeah. It's so good to hear you say that because I get content creators, amateur, and I don't mean this. I'm about to say something that sounds disparaging, but I don't mean it. Wannabe content creators. So this is not bad to want to be a content creator. I'll put it this way. But there's a lot of folks who, they aspire to large audiences like Kent C. Dodds or James Q. Quick. Everybody wants to be like this content creator, and
I want to be Fireship.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Some people want to be like Taylor, and they ask me. They say, okay, how can I? I'm not even in that league, but I guess I'm just close enough to them that they can ask me for advice. And so they do. And I often say, I think the real secret sauce, exactly echoing Jeff, what you've just said, is to just do it. And my question is, have you made at least 100 videos and published them? And the answer is usually not. And I'm like, then why are you talking to me? Because you just keep showing up and doing it. If nobody watches it, it doesn't matter. At least not so early. Because what I see is a lot of folks will like make one video, upload it, and then just stare at that analytics graph for like a week. That's not going to help anything. So I just to plus one what you're saying. I think
it's a whole different dynamic for content creators. I get it.
But I think maybe also
same
not because,
idea. But you got to keep on putting things out. It's actually
Yeah.
better for content creators because you do have analytics. When I give a talk, I don't know how well it did. I can look at how many
Yeah.
people started creating NX workspaces, but yeah, with the
Yeah.
content, you get that immediate feedback of I produced 10 videos, which ones are really resonating or which ones did the
Yeah.
algorithm favor?
Yeah. I want to start wrapping up. I want to ask you two questions. One sort of product oriented, and the other one more philosophical. Let's start with the product question, and that's NX Cloud. We've talked a lot about NX, about how it's this brilliant monorepo slash tool runner slash orchestrator slash code migrator slash scaffolder.
Mhm.
We've talked about the value add. We've talked about the developer experience and how you measure it. We've talked about a number of things. We did touch briefly on NX Cloud as being a way to run your builds efficiently through the use of highly parallelizable agents.
Mhm.
Can we talk a little bit more about NX Cloud? What is the premier use case for NX Cloud? What is like if you get a customer on NX Cloud, how can they get the best experience? I guess I'm asking this weird.
Yeah.
What I mean is like who when they sign up to NX Cloud is going to be like, oh my god, this is absolutely brilliant. This is exactly what I wanted. What do they have to be looking for?
Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of little things that it does. Like it's got a great UI for watching builds and makes a lot of things simple, explorable. But the big reason people use it is for CI performance, local performance as well. You get some benefits because of the caching, but the big thing, the reason people pay for it is because it makes CI faster, which in turn makes developers more productive, theoretically. That if we can take a CI from 2 hours and for a queue that can be 20 PRs long waiting to be built, if we can take that down to 15 minutes on average, then that's a huge impact for the organization.
Are
And
those real numbers? Do you
there,
sometimes have
I wouldn't say it's. I would. It is some customers who've been in that case. I don't know if we've taken it from 2 hours down to tens of minutes at least. And then
wow.
there's always things. It's always a matter of what are you willing to do to get there, without compromising quality and things like that. So sometimes it's like, okay, let's change the relationship of these projects that are depending on each other or are always depending on this, whatever. But yeah, if they add cloud, there's an immediate benefit, but if they're an enterprise customer that we're working with, they're going to see an even greater benefit. And that's basically our enterprise is basically cloud plus us helping you. That's what our enterprise contracts are, and a couple other features. But yeah, so the thing people are paying for is CI speed, and the way we do it is the first thing we did was the replay, NX replay, where it's the caching of caching, distributing the cache. So if you built something locally, CI can use that and be faster. Yeah. If CI's built something, you can use that locally and be faster. That's such a small benefit compared to distribution, which is a lot harder to do, and it's also the last layer of defense. Even if you have to build your whole workspace, distribution makes it where you can just say, okay, my workspace, my code is somewhat distributable. If I can just throw 10, 20 agents at this, depending on the code base, then I can make it run pretty fast without having to do anything. NX knows the right way to. It knows what's cached, how long things take, how they depend on each other. So it uses all this stuff we know about it, all the history we have of your workspace to figure out how to move it across these agents in a way that's going to be much better than any kind of naive parallelization or binning that you might try to do yourself.
Awesome. I fully understand now NX Cloud and its value proposition, and I know when to use it. And I think that's why the podcast exists. Is we want to learn about these tools. We want to learn about how they're built, and you did explain that through, for example, how NX uses agents, even at the file level for like end-to-end tests. Mm-hmm. And then I want to know when's a good time to reach for it, and you just so graciously answered that. I so appreciate it. Okay. One more product question. I lied, but I'm curious because NX is able to achieve all of these things, especially NX Cloud, based on its vast understanding of the project's history, of where the cache is distributed, and of the whole like dependency graph of the project and projects in a monorepo. This seems like also a great case for some AI applications. I mean, AI is in the zeitgeist. I feel like this is I don't know if y'all are fundraising, but if you are, then that word would probably give you some boosts. I'm curious, is there any R&D going on in that direction to see how Gen AI can help make things maybe even faster or even better with NX Cloud?
And like good startups, we call any machine learning AI now. So I think we actually are working on several different fronts with AI and machine learning. And for cloud, I think the most interesting thing is probably exactly this, but we're using it for training on your historical runs and doing dynamic agent allocation. So right now, you basically say small, medium, large. Here's how many agents to provision for a small change, medium change, large change. But we're working on something where you can just give some parameters on how to optimize for cost or for speed of compute at different times, and we can figure out how to provision agents in the most optimal way to say, okay, you need 10 large agents because this is heavy compute and whatever other stuff. So we're working on that, which is I think is going to be a pretty big impact. It's one of those things you have to actually try it and see, is it as big as we think it's going to be? But I think it'll at least make things simpler and should reduce costs and reduce time even more, depending on which you care more about. Do I want to throw more compute and reduce the time? Do I want to reduce costs? But anyway, we're making it where you can give those inputs and we can figure out for you how to allocate agents. So it's like we're totally breaking the whole pipeline paradigm, I think is the best way to think about it. Like pipelines don't really make sense for monorepos where different things are happening every time. You're not rebuilding the same thing every time. And so we're building something that's a better alternative to pipeline. It's like a graph builder.
That's so cool. Yeah. And I think you could also, for example, have AI used for your deflaking of tests, for example. Like, here, this test may be flaky. Here's where it's probably flaky. Here's how you can make it less flaky, for example. And I think also,
we do have a team just doing AI and ML stuff right now who like that's one of the things they're looking at. We're doing other things actually with we have a tool called NX Console that's a plugin for Visual Studio Code and WebStorm that is like a way to interact with your NX workspace other than the command line, which has some pretty cool stuff in it. So we're building we're experimenting with some things in there to make it where code gen, maybe there's some things we can do to work with other code gen tools to make them more workspace aware and like just make them a little smarter. We're not going to build a better alternative to Copilot. We don't have anything that GitHub has. We don't have the training set. We don't have the huge team. But we want to figure out how we can add better guardrails for people using Gen AI, which I think is going to become more and more prevalent. And I think we're in a great spot to be an even better validation tool or to orchestrate validation for folks. We're doing a bunch of other things. The first thing we did was to make an AI for our docs to kind of test the waters, and that's pretty cool. So we have like I forget what it's called, but some kind of AI chat where you can ask the docs something, and it'll give you a pretty good answer most of the time.
That's awesome.
It's gotten better.
GitHub Copilot, as of today, actually supports extensions, so you can like mention various things. So you could be like @NX. Help me do this, and that's probably another. That's something I think can also help. Okay, awesome. That's the tech side. Thank you for that. The product side. The other question I had, very philosophical, and it may require a pause and for you to think. I've asked this to literally every guest in the season, and some of them go like, "Oh my gosh, I need like 5 minutes to think about this." So if that's the case, totally fine. Where I'm going with this is, in the engineering space, we have living standard documents. So HTML has a specification. A div is this, and a span is that, and it's a living standard, right? It outlines what to expect from the language when you use it a certain way. JavaScript, same thing. There's a language specification. Const means this, let means that, etc., etc. From a discussion last year with some friends, technical founders, and so on, we quickly inferred that there isn't such a thing for CEOs, tech CEOs, especially not professional CEOs, but sort of people who walked into it as after founding a company.
A standard definition of what you need to become to be effective as a CEO? Or?
No. Not so much what you need to become, but more what you can expect. A thing that keeps coming up that you maybe a hard-earned lesson that you went like, I wish this was in some type of guidebook or rule book. I wish this was codified in some living standard document where I would have been prepared for this. And I can give you some examples. So Matt Bielman, the CEO of Netlify, he said, you've got to be able to adapt and change rapidly
Hmm.
based on, serverless is cool today. It may not be cool tomorrow. What are we doing? You
Yeah.
have to be adaptable was something he said, something David Khurshid said. Glauber Costa and Brandon Bayer said this thing about messaging and positioning being the hardest problem and the hardest thing to get right. You have to be prepared for that. And it was Babak Tavangar. So he's the inventor of these frame glasses. They're glasses, eyeglasses that have like AR inside. That's open source with an AI assistant. And he mentioned the only he mentioned that no is the beginning of a conversation. It's not a rejection. So for him as a founder, he's like, you say no, I can't put ChatGPT in glasses, but that's the beginning to my conversation.
Hmm.
So with all of that, what maybe hard earned lesson or unexpected thing would you put in such a document if it existed as sort of a service to future founders and CEOs?
So I stop me if I'm going in the wrong direction, but so in terms of like a standard of how so you talked about Matt Billman and like the adaptation, which is huge, and both as a product and as a CEO, you have to keep
Yes.
adapting to what the company needs right now. There are some things that it'll always need, but like I had to become a different CEO when we raised funding and went all in on product. Victor had to change a lot about how he works. Our whole team had to go through a transition from consulting to predominantly product. So you have to. I would echo that one. Adaptation applies in so many areas, but especially yourself. You need to always be looking ahead to see where are we going and what do I need to be, what do I need to become to be the right CEO for that stage. I would say I think the CEO's job is to keep pushing the company in more uncomfortable directions, maybe, or more bold directions that may seem difficult to do or impossible. You'd be surprised how many things seem impossible but are possible with 5 minutes of thinking about it. And I think that's like a lot of stuff doesn't get built because people they can't in their head figure out how something would work. But if they would just like write it down or draw it out or something, they would be like, okay, here's a clear thing. And that's been the case with a lot of stuff we've built has been like distribution. We were like, okay, how would we do this? And then Victor spent a weekend on it and was like, okay, here's how it works. I guess we should do this. So yeah, I think I think that's the biggest thing is you need to always be figuring out how to be the right CEO for the next phase or the current phase. And maybe there's a time where you don't belong in the CEO seat anymore and you need to get somebody else in that seat. You should be self-aware of that as well. Yeah. So did I come close to giving you the answer?
Yeah. I mean, there is no right answer. It's all based on your experience. And you mentioned you could talk for a very long time about hard-earned lessons and things you had to
Yeah.
adapt and evolve. So yeah, I think you did. I think it's interesting that you mentioned it's sort of wearing many masks, or maybe masks is negatively connotated. Wearing many hats, put it that way.
Yeah.
What CEO do I need to be in this season? Do I need to be the fundraiser? Do I need to be the hiring person? Where do I need to go? And that's something that nobody has mentioned so far. Matt mentioned changing and adapting by season, so to speak. But I think you mentioned it in a slightly different way, for what I can tell, which is very, very cool. So being able to be versatile, fantastic. Okay, last question, Jeff Cross.
Oh no, this is scary.
No. What is next for NX? We already talked about the AI features and so on, but concretely, open source project or the cloud offering, what's currently being worked on? What can people expect? What can they look forward to? And where can they find it?
Okay, we've got several things. So we have we're putting on a conference in October called Monorepo
What?
World.
Awesome.
We just announced it last week, I think. We usually do an NX conf with just the NX community, but we're broadening it. We're bringing in other friends working on tools and products and the system, the ecosystem. So we use that as kind of conference-driven development where we say, okay, here's a milestone 6 months from now. It's 5 months, 4 months, whatever it is now. And we say, what are the big things we can focus on then that we want to talk about at the conference, and then we work backwards from there. So the thing I'm most excited about is we're working on something that's been asked for by a lot of our customers or users over the years that we've been making NX, And that's something to add more to account for the fact that there are many workspaces with any organization, and they are detached right now. There's no visibility between them, like what's using what from this workspace, and vice versa. What dependencies are they on versus this other workspace? It's very, very, you have to go into each workspace to understand what people are doing and how they depend on each other, and lots of other things that I'm not remembering right now. But there's just lots of things that you don't have right now for every organization has multiple workspaces. So we're building into NX Cloud, into NX Enterprise at first, something we call Polygraph, where it's a graph of polyrepos, basically. And it's also a lie detector. But so we're building this thing that can tie these together. And you can impose certain monorepo constraints across these workspaces if you want to. Or like the minimum, you can use it as visibility to say, okay, this package from this repository is dependent on here at this version, and this repo is on React 1. This one's on React 16.
And these are polyrepo. These are different repositories within a GitHub organization.
Yeah, or any one that you can tie together. But yeah, you could just say everything in the GitHub org. Let's see how it depends on each other. And so I think that's going to be a huge thing. It's something that if you're not working in that environment, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it's been so asked for, and so something that we've just been putting off that we're like, okay, we need to do this because it keeps coming up. Our paying customers are saying we need this, so maybe we should take it more seriously. So I'm super excited about it, and it's underway and already pretty cool how it's being implemented. So I'm excited to actually bring it to the world in October.
Awesome. When October? Do we have a date yet? Like a concrete one?
October 7th in Mountain View, California, at the Computer History Museum.
October 7th in Mountain View.
You can go to monorepo.tools, and there's a link to the conference at the top.
Great. And we'll also put a link in the show notes so people can buy tickets and attend. Man, I wish I could attend. I think I'm speaking at another conference on that day.
Yeah,
but if not...
we always try to avoid conflicts, but it's impossible,
I think Smashing Conf New York is on that date.
And I think there's
probably where
View conference. I don't remember which one, but I think there is a View conference at the same time.
Yeah. May, what I've learned is June and October are just, you have absolutely no chance. And also really the end of May. I mean, we just had, what was it? OpenAI had a conference, Google I.O., MS Build is this week. So May, June, and October.
Yeah, it's heavy travel season for me.
Yeah. With that, listen, Jeff, I don't want to take any more of your time. I do, however, want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and really diving deep. I mean, we had a session where we talked about Lexers and Parsers and looked it up, and we talked about NX, what it is, when to use it. We explored the question or the statement, monorepos are hard. We talked about the agents that can run end-to-end tests per file. And we talked about the future of NX, which I'm super excited about. I can't wait to see Polygraph and what it looks like. And I look forward to the demos, both from the conference and videos later if I don't attend, or in person, and also on Yuri's channel or the NX channel. We'll put links to all of this in the show notes as well. Yeah. On behalf of myself and all the listeners, Jeff, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about these things.
Thanks. This was it was fun. If nothing else, it was fun for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining my discussion with Jeff Cross. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. I hope you learned a ton about NX and how it works internally, both the cloud product and the developer experience product. I look forward to hearing reports of your deflaked tests, your faster CI builds, and your large migrations, and your monorepo efficiency. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then I'd invite you to subscribe to the channel on YouTube and like the video if you're watching on YouTube. It's a great way to support the channel. If you're listening on Spotify and or Apple, then I'd invite you to leave up to a 5-star review. All of this helps. If you have topics you'd like me to cover or guests you'd like me to have, leave a comment. I read all the comments, and really, ultimately, this is for you, right? This is a service to you, and I hope you benefit from and enjoy it. And if you don't, also share that with me, because I want to create something useful for you. Thanks so much for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of the podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.